The Limitless Leadership Lounge is a tri-generational conversation for you, the emerging leader. I'm stoked for our conversation today. You should be too, especially if you're a young leader who's looking to expand, grow your network, and learn some insights into that. We have a very special guest on today. Want to remind you too, if you're getting value from this and if you enjoy this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on one of our podcast players, leave us a review up on all of those podcast players or just where you're listening. Maybe it's Apple Podcasts. We appreciate that. That will give us some valuable feedback and help reach more people, young and emerging leaders like yourself, who could benefit from this, because that's what we're all about here. Well, Dr. Rehnuma Karim joins us today from Bangladesh, where it's nice and warm and sunny, and Coach and I and Scott, where it's maybe sunny anyway, but not so warm. Coach, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Well, I'm really excited because I consider Scott a friend, although we've never met in person, but we have talked, and I'm just really impressed with this a fine young man. He's a great person, and we're really excited to have him. So let me just share a few things about Scott. He's got so many things I can't go through them all, but he's very impressive. So Scott is the founder of the Outlier Project, which we're going to delve a little bit into today. It's part of a group that I've been welcomed into, and it's really an outstanding group. He's also the founder of the Outlier magazine, the founder and CEO of Something New. He's a four-time author. I read a couple of his books, a Standing O. So when we put this on YouTube, we got to do a little promoting for Scott. Some great books. He has a record 8 consecutive American Business Awards for innovation. He's the best of the staffing winner. He's a net promoter score of 98.4. He's the winner of a Sales Executive Year, American Business Awards in 2005, the Founder magazine of 100 top founders to follow. He's by 29, he was recruited by a tech startup as the chief revenue officer. He's the youngest national account manager in the history of a Fortune 500 company, Pitney Bowes. And he is a member of the Walter Camp Football Foundation and so much more. Scott, my friend, welcome to the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Thank you for having me. And the thing you said that brought me the most joy was you called me a young man. So I'm that I'll take that at 57. I'll take that any day.
Absolutely. Well, I guess I got to say, because when people are younger than me, which is a lot now, everybody's now more and more younger for me. So Scott, we're excited to have you. And I want to start. There's so many things that impresses me about you, but one that just really jumps out, and I think it's really pertinent to young leaders, is your ability to connect with people. Can you share some advice on how you've been able to be a great connector?
Yeah, I think it's just all about being curious. I'm a super curious guy, and I was when I was 7 years old, and I am today, even maybe more so at 57. So I think it starts with just being curious. It's it's also very important, I think, to try to figure out what you can do for other people, not what they can do for you. And I think where people kind of screw up relationships and friendships is they're trying to create something transactional. They're trying to figure out a way, how can I monetize my relationship with this person rather than how can I get to know this person? How can I develop a friendship? And the history has been for me that when you develop true friendships, great things happen, but they're very, very unpredictable. My whole life, I've wound up because of relationships, I've wound up in really great spots. And when I look back and think, how the heck did I get here? It's not a straight line. It's a very circuitous path that got me there. And if I had tried to predict that path in the beginning, I would have never been able to do that. So I think, just don't go into things thinking about a certain outcome. Just think of building a relationship, building a friendship.
And Scott, I have to ask you this question. In your bio, you said that dancing and smiling is not your thing. But I think you are a great like a smile person, and you are a connector. For connecting, you need to smile at people. So definitely you need to work change that bio, like where you mentioned that you don't smile.
My
That's
resting
not true.
face is not a good smiling face, and when I'm asked to smile, like when I'm asked to pose for a picture, it's very goofy. So if it's natural, like I'm good to go. But
Oh,
yeah,
but
I'm not a
Scott,
pose for a picture guy.
Scott, I have to ask you because always when you name something, your organization or your magazine, there is a story behind it. So I'm
Sure.
curious because when I started my nonprofit Heroes for All, I knew I wanted to tap into the young people's inner heroes so that they can be others' heroes. So, what was the story behind your organization's name, like the something new? Why? Why did you
Yeah,
choose
I
this
was
name?
a chief revenue officer for 17 years and helped grow a company from 5 people to about 300. And we had double-digit growth every single year for 17 straight years. So we were hiring a lot of people. And I was drinking from a fire hose every single day. So I was trying to figure out ways that I could outsource things. And certainly it seemed like talent acquisition could be something we could outsource because it seemed like, especially in 2008, the economy was terrible, but we were hiring like crazy. Every
Mm.
recruiter and their brother was calling us, offering us great talent. So over the course of not only those 17 years, but even previous to that, being a manager at Pitney Bowes, I'd been hiring people for, 20 plus years. My experiences with traditional recruiters was lackluster at best. And I wanted to build a new mousetrap. And I wanted to do things in a very, very different way. So something new was really what I was trying to build something new.
All right.
And I thought it was a very appropriate name, and it seems like it's stuck. And I think the other thing I knew is we had to be innovative. And when
Mm.
you call your company something new, if you're doing the same thing year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, now we're at year 10, you'd be a hypocrite. So I
Mm.
like that it put the pressure on us to be innovative, and we've been lucky. We've won 8 consecutive American Business Awards for innovation. So
Wonderful.
the name is appropriate.
It all starts with
Excellent.
curiosity, and you talked about curiosity just recently when it comes to connecting. Curiosity about people and curiosity, I'm sure, about other things too. How do you nourish that curiosity continually on a day-to-day basis? As someone who has achieved a lot, done a lot, it's probably easy to lose that humility and lose that curiosity. So how do you keep that nourished and keep that fresh so that you can continue to learn and grow?
It's a great question. For some people, it might be a challenge. For me, it's not a challenge at all. I am just wildly curious. I'm curious about the path that people chose to accomplish great things. I'm curious about why that was interesting to them. I'm just curious about every aspect of the people that I get to know. It's very innate to me. It's something I've always had, and it has never diminished at all. I did think early on, like I thought I was curious because I grew up relatively poor in a very, very affluent town.
Hmm.
And I thought I was curious because I couldn't quite figure out how everybody lived economically very different from my family. But 57 years later, 50 years later, I'm still wildly curious about how people got where they got and why they chose those paths. So for me, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just a DNA thing.
Mm-hmm.
Scott, I got to ask you because I'm so impressed with just the little experience I have with the Outliers Project. Can you share? Because there may be some listeners that would like to get involved because I am just so impressed not only with your leadership, but the number of people I've connected with the Outliers Project. I've just been so impressed. Just a great group of people of everyone I've connected with. Can you tell us the genesis of it and tell us a little bit more about it? Because I think it's appealing to a lot of people.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. I get this question all the time, and I feel like I need to make up a better story because the truth of why I created it, it's the confluence of a lot of different things. It's not, I didn't have an epiphany moment and say, boom, let's start a community. Part of it was that curiosity. That curiosity led to a lot of relationships because I think when you are curious, people respond very positively to that. So I built a lot of really significant relationships over my life. I think the other part is I knew as a kid, I knew I was an outlier. I knew I thought differently than my peers. But when you're a kid and you think differently, you just think you're weird. You don't embrace that as a positive. You're like, there's something wrong with me. I don't think the way that most people think. As I got older and when I got into business, I found myself achieving things that my peers were not achieving. And I couldn't figure out why was this happening for me. I didn't have more money, didn't have more connections, wasn't better looking, I didn't seem like I wasn't smarter than the average bear. I couldn't figure it out. And then I realized it was because I was an outlier, meaning I've always been a contrarian. If everyone's going left, I intuitively want to go right. I never want to be in the thundering herd. And so I've consistently taken the path less traveled, which is an outlierish thing to do. So those are bits and pieces of why I started it. I certainly recognize that I was not the only one. As I got to know people who had achieved great things, people that had won Olympic gold medals, people that have written New York Times best-selling books, people that have been Navy SEALs, pro athletes, billion-dollar CEOs, they're all outliers. They all take the path less traveled. And I thought, why don't I put a community together where we could celebrate being an outlier as opposed to, oftentimes you're called a maverick, you're called a rebel, you're called a black sheep, you're somewhat misunderstood. And I thought, boy, I think it's great to be an outlier. Let's put together a community where we celebrate that, we uplift each other, and we give people extremely unique experiences to get to know other outliers and help them live their version of an extraordinary life. So not an easy elevator pitch, but that's kind of all these different confluences that came together to help me decide to form it.
God, I could relate so much with you because I have been called an outlier since childhood because I grew up in Bangladesh where the society was where women were not so much out there. And I was like a rebel, playing soccer with the guys, then deciding not to get married when all the girls are getting married. So I've been always called those black sheep, the outlier, not normal, crazy. But now I realize at the age I'm almost 50, I realized that this was the blessing. It was because of my curiosity and explore nature of exploring everything, the world also. I think I'm much more happier and
Mm-hmm.
satisfied and fulfilled with my life. And it's interesting to be not being in the crowd. So thank you, and I need to be part of your outlier group. I
No
can see
doubt.
myself there.
We'll welcome you
So
with open arms.
thank you. And my question, everybody tells me that I'm I'm always choosing different paths. So every 10 year, I seem to reinvent myself. So I was working in UNICEF in the first half when I just graduated, and then into academics. Then I decided to start my nonprofit. Next 10 years, I'm now learning how to write movie script and make movies. I want to be a movie director. So from your point of view, from an expert point of view, am I doing thing? Am I in the wrong track because I'm changing my path so often? Like everybody's telling, like, just focus. You have to focus on one thing, and that should be your life. What is your take on it? So people like us who tend to switch things.
I think whatever brings you joy is what you should do. And if you want to, I say all the time, I'm only married to one thing. I'm married to my wonderful wife, Meg. I'm not married to a certain business. I'm not married to a certain way of doing things. I'm only married to Meg, and everything else is negotiable. So,
Mhm.
there are times, and there is a season for everything in our life. And there are times when we are wildly
Mm.
passionate about what we're doing, but sometimes that passion changes and we find something else that really lights our fire. And I think oftentimes people just keep doing the same thing over and over again, and very slowly they kind of start to live a vanilla life. And to me,
Mm.
that's super unappealing. So I like knowing in my mind that everything's negotiable. I see people that if you said, I think you should change your logo, or I think you should change the colors in your, company logo, they hold on to that like
Mm.
with dear life. And I think, who cares? Don't get married. Don't get so tightly intertwined with one thing, because life is all about experiencing new things and being open to change. So yeah,
Mm.
I celebrate the path you're on and the pivots that you made. I think that leads to a rich existence.
Yeah, and Scott, I have a follow-up question to that. There are so many of my friends who are afraid to switch job or career. They're so unhappy in their present job, and but grudgingly going there every day and being angry all the time. And I'm always telling them that why don't you switch the career? But they're always telling me that it's too late. Is it too late to switch careers in their 40s or 50s? What did you find from your
Absolutely
point of
not.
view?
No, I think it's never too late. There are so many examples throughout history of people that have, completely pivoted and done amazing things that seem very unlikely. But no, I don't think it's ever too late. I think that's head trash that we tell ourselves. Oftentimes we're telling ourselves that because it's scary to go, even when we're not in a good situation. It's sometimes scarier to do something new, to try something new, than it is to just kind of continue to be miserable. So
Mm.
um, I would say, yeah, it's never too late.
Mm.
Mhm.
Hey,
Thank you.
Scott, you going back to talking about your group here because we talk about outliers and what it means to be an outlier and how you're kind of in your upbringing an outlier too. So, Coach mentioned all the great people that he's met in that group. Other than the fact that they're all outliers in some way, what else do they have in common? What can we expect if we become part of the outliers group?
They all show up differently. They believe in showing up differently. I always say that our community, so we have about 750 members in 35 countries. Um, they're not like minded. They are like hearted, though.
Mm.
So they're outliers. So everyone has a different perspective, everyone has a different opinion, but I think it's how we communicate and how we support each other in the group. That's where I would say we're like hearted. So everyone has an abundance mentality rather than a scarcity mentality. And I think because of that, everyone's very willing to help other people reach their goals. So I think it's just a very different mindset. Um, and I think when you wind up surrounding yourself by people who are unafraid to travel that path less traveled, it becomes less and less scary because you see the success. And that is truly where the pot of gold is. That's where success lies. It's in that path less traveled. It's very rarely, in the path that everyone else is taking.
That's the huge thing because they say we are the average of those that we surround ourselves with, right? And that's something that, whether it be in business or in life, is so important. So, who are some of the mentors and some of those people, especially in your younger years growing up, that you surrounded yourself with that helped you become the successful leader you are today?
Yeah, I've always surrounded myself with great people. People that are 100 steps ahead of me and probably always will be 100 steps ahead of me. Probably the person who had the most impact on my life was my uncle Ray, who both of my grandfathers passed away before I was born. So I adopted my uncle Ray as my grandfather. And he was just a role model for me, incredibly humble, unbelievably hardworking, incredibly supportive, very, very bright. He owned a local newspaper, but nobody really knew that he was one of the owners because he continued to work kind of, in jobs that were well below his status as the owner of a business. But I just thought he was one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life. So I thought if I could ever be half the man that my Uncle Ray was, I would have lived a successful life. And I've wanted to make him proud. I know he was proud of me. He wasn't really into sports, but I was super into sports. And when he passed away, I found stacks of paper clippings, newspaper clippings of, some of the things that I had done athletically. And he was just a huge cheerleader for me. More recently, I would say Jesse Itzler has played a massive role in my life. Jesse's a friend of mine. He is an incredibly successful entrepreneur. He started Marquis Jet, which he sold to Warren Buffett. He founded Zico Water, which he sold to Coca-Cola. He wrote the theme song for the New York Knicks, Go New York, Go New York, Go. He married Sarah Blakely, who is the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. He owns the Atlanta Hawks. It's not those achievements, though, that are the reason why Jesse is such a special person to me. Jesse lives his life for a living. Jesse lives an extraordinary life. And long before Jesse was a wildly successful entrepreneur, he was living his life just the way he lives it today. And he's such a great role model as a father, as a husband, as a friend, as an entrepreneur. Jesse to me is just a really, really special guy. I just had the honor of putting him on the cover of the latest issue of Outlier magazine, which was a real thrill to show the world the person that I have just so much respect and admiration for.
It's really cool.
Yes.
Hey, Scott, how about as far as, going back to your building businesses, because I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs listen. And when you're building businesses, obviously you have to bring people on, and building a team. So what advice would you give in trying to build a team of people that are going to support each other and or help the business grow?
It's the most important thing you have to do in business. Oftentimes people get very seduced and fall in love with their technology or their service, and they believe that that's what's going to ultimately bring them success. And I try to remind those founders that while that product or service is certainly very important, it's the people you hire and the teams you build that will dictate your success or failure and the degree of your success or failure. And I have a saying, people over everything, a kind of a mantra that I live by. And it's the secret to success for every business is putting people first and really being extremely thoughtful and strategic when it comes to things like talent acquisition, onboarding, and retention, and having a strategy. Oftentimes, when I speak to founders, although they will tell me that labor, meaning people, is the biggest expense in their business, if I look at where they spend their time in sales and finance everywhere, but really developing their people strategy. They just kind of wing it. And oftentimes I point to professional sports, which really spends a tremendous amount of time figuring out how to evaluate talent. Corporate America hasn't quite caught up with that. It's the most important thing you have to do. And any success that I've ever had in business had to do with the people that I hired and the teams that I built. I think the other mistake people make is they look for very obvious things. They look for years of experience, or they look at industry experience, when the things that are most important are typically things you can't see obviously on a LinkedIn profile or resume. Things like work ethic, discipline, resiliency, empathy, communication skills. Give me somebody with those attributes, I will hire that person every single day over the person that has 15 years experience in a certain industry. That is not a predictor of future success, but things like work ethic, discipline, resiliency, empathy, communication skills, those are indicators of future success.
Scott, I got to just dig in a little bit deeper because you made some great points about, because obviously, as a basketball coach, I wanted players that had talent in basketball. But there was other ingredients, and you talked about someone. We wanted someone with great work ethic and coachable. My question to you is, because those are great things, but as the leader, how do you find those out? How do you recognize those things?
The first thing is you have to realize that it's something you need to be looking for. And then I believe that every company should scorecard people. So everything that you look, so if you look at any job description, you could go to Indeed or any job board, and you could look at literally any job description out there. It is a laundry list of 20, 30 things that they're looking for. But when you do that and you don't put a weight behind them, meaning that this is most important, this is a must-have, this is a nice to have, and you weight them differently, you will ultimately overvalue or undervalue certain things. So first is the recognition that something like coachability is something that is a must-have. And we have a system for helping people to do that. And then it's being skilled in behavioral interviewing to understand what questions do I need to ask to figure out whether somebody's coachable. Because I'm not going to find it. I may find breadcrumbs in a resume or a LinkedIn profile, but I'm not going to find out whether they truly are coachable or have a great work ethic or are resilient. So you have to be very skilled in behavioral interviewing. And I have found that most people that interview people, that evaluate people for a living, are wildly unqualified to do it. They really don't have a process. They don't understand how to do behavioral interviewing properly, and they don't use things like scorecarding, et cetera, to try to make really, really good decisions.
Mm. Yeah, and while you were talking about all those characteristics, I recall reading some journal article where Zeppo and Google, they also have scenario questions to find who is the most optimistic
Yep.
person, because they found out that optimists often can solve problem and see things in a different way and won't give up. So they were looking for optimists in their in while they were hunting for people in their team. So I just thought that it was so interesting that optimism plays a big role as well.
Plays a huge role.
Yeah. And what question? Because most of our listeners are young people from all over the world, and they often ask me, "How do I know for which career I am best suited?" So, if you have any suggestion, what are some questions they should ask themselves before choosing that right track? That am I on this track, right track that connects with my values and who I am?
I think you've got to do the same evaluation process that a company does. You've got to figure out what's important to me. Is it to
Mm,
maximize my income? Is it the company culture? Is it the job responsibility? Is it the upward mobility? Is it the learning and development opportunity? Like what am I looking for? And then stack rank those things highest to lowest,
mm,
and then create your own scorecard so that when you are interviewing with a company afterwards, you can go back and you can say, well, I would score this a 10 out of 10, and this is a must have versus a nice to have. Oftentimes, people make decisions as a job candidate to join a company based on things that are actually not that important.
mm,
And because they don't have a process. So I'm a big process person. I think you've got to
wow.
have a process for evaluating things. Otherwise, you can get swayed by things that they might be shiny on the surface, but they wear off very quickly. And at the end of the day, they probably won't make you happy at that company. So, you could walk into an office and you could see ping pong tables and free snacks and beer on tap and this and that. And you may think like, wow, this is amazing.
Mm,
Those things tend to wane in terms of their importance. But people can get swayed by those things, just like companies can get swayed by, wow, Sally or Johnny went to Harvard, or, they used to work at Google, or
mm,
whatever the case may be. It's not that that's irrelevant, but I certainly wouldn't make a hiring decision based on it.
Sure.
right. Right.
Yeah. Also, I would also say that when it comes to people who
Mm,
are evaluating talent, they need to be evaluated too, right? How do you evaluate people who evaluate talent?
mm,
How do you evaluate people who evaluate talent? It's a great question.
mm,
Most people, when you ask them, what is your hiring process? Like, what are the questions you ask to try to uncover the things that you're looking for? They really are kind of like a deer in the headlights. They don't really have a process. Or they think, well, I've been hiring people for years, but have they ever looked at their scorecard? Like how well do you do that? You know, I would say the biggest claim to fame that maybe I could ever attribute to myself is when I was a chief revenue officer, I went 9 years without losing one person.
Wow.
Um, Most companies don't go 9 months without losing somebody. We went 9 years, almost a full decade. The first person who decided to leave was a woman. Her name was Lauren Dureste. She was one of my top performers, but she really wanted to be a psychologist. And she left and went back to school and became a psychologist. That was the first person we lost in 9 years. But the reason why we didn't lose people was because I spent almost all of my time thinking about what am I really looking for? How am I going to evaluate these people? How am I going to scorecard them? how am I going to onboard them? So it was a real thoughtful process that got me there. But most people have never been trained to do that, or they've never taken it upon themselves to understand how to do it, which is why I say most people are wildly unqualified to do the job that they do every single day.
Great question. Well, Scott, I got to take you back to your high school days. So I saw you played on a state championship football team. Okay. Always intriguing because I always try to figure out, with the teams that became champions that I coached, as opposed to teams that maybe had even more talent but weren't. What were a couple characteristics that jumped out about that team and winning a state championship compared to some of the other teams that maybe had as much talent but didn't do as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I grew up in a town where football is king, and it's the, second most state championships in state history. I think we're at 14 at this point.
Wow.
It's all boiled down to this. We were very rarely the most athletic team. We very rarely had the most raw physical athletic talent. But we definitely outworked everybody. I was very fortunate. I played for two Hall of Fame coaches. So I played for Larry Ciotti, who is in the Hall of Fame and is now coaching at Yale. And I played for Steve Filippone, who is another Hall of Fame coach. He was my position coach and also my baseball coach. So I was very fortunate. I mean, they really used like a Vince Lombardi principle. We didn't have the fanciest offense in the world, but we knew how to execute. We also knew that if the game was close in the fourth quarter, we were always going to be better physically conditioned. So we were better coached. We were better conditioned. We were tougher. Our practices were absolutely brutal. It's kind of an interesting thing. So what would happen often at my school is we would win a state championship, and then spring football would come around, and 120 to 150 kids would be like, I want to play on a state championship team. I want to wear that state championship jacket. By the time the season started, which meant you went through spring football, but then you had to go through double sessions in August, we would typically start a season with about 40 or 50 guys. So that meant 100 people that said, hey, I want to be on that team. They couldn't make it. It was so hard. Our coaches made practice so difficult that it made games seem very, very easy.
That's a very interesting concept that I think can actually affect business owners too, and us in everyday life, whether we're in athletics or not. When we practice so hard, when we work on our craft so hard, sometimes it makes the real thing feel easy. Really good stuff, Scott. Finally, I know we're wrapping up on time here, but your athletic career, we can't not mention that and what impact it might have had on your success now with the Outlier Project and your books and everything else that you do. What did you learn most of all in sports that now affects you even to this day?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record because I think I've said this a few times already, but it's work ethic, discipline, resiliency, very simple things that, thank God, are controllable, can lead you to massive success. I have very rarely been the smartest guy in the room. And, I've seen very, very intelligent people with super high IQs get very frustrated when they see people that just have a better work ethic and better discipline run circles around them. So I'm very fortunate. I had a teacher in high school. His name was Frank Barron. He was a journalism teacher. He was also a lacrosse coach. Um, and I'll never forget this because I had grown up relatively poor in this affluent town. And I was like, man, how am I going to be successful? I couldn't even figure out how people bought houses and cars. Like it seemed unattainable to me. And I'll never forget in our journalism class, he said to the whole class, he said, you will all be very successful if you do two things. You've got to work hard and you've got to be kind.
Mm.
And I thought, it can't be that easy. So I went up to him after class and I said, Coach, do you mean it? Do you mean that if I work hard and I'm kind, I'll be successful? And he said, yes. The degree to which you'll be successful, I can't tell you because there are other factors. But if you do those two things, you will be successful. And I remember thinking in that moment, boy, those are two things I can control. I can't control my IQ. I had a learning disability, which was not diagnosed until I was an adult. I had ADHD. Um, but I'm like, man, I can control how hard I work. I can control how kind I am to other people. And tripling down on those things has led to, a fair amount of success. So a lot of, I give people like Frank Barron, my coaches, I give them a ton of credit for all the basic things that they taught me as a very young person that have translated into business success. So athletics and competition and all the things that it brings, I think are a great, great learning ground and proving ground for people to be successful, whether as an entrepreneur or in corporate America.
Wow. I really love that. I think we can all resonate with that journalism teacher's words. Maybe it is really that simple. And Scott, you're doing a lot of great work with over, you said 700 members. Is that right?
750 odd members and growing pretty rapidly.
That and your Outlier project and some of your books as well. Lot going on that you have. So tell us how we can learn more about you and potentially even get in touch, either join the group or grab a book or two of yours.
Yeah, grab a book. So 100% of the proceeds to all the standing O's goes to charity. So it was my way of giving back. When I started my company, Something New, 10 years ago, giving back was very, very important to me, but I am an absolute control freak. So I did not want to take any outside funding because I knew that meant that somebody else was going to dictate what I could do and what I couldn't do. So it left me in a really precarious position where I'm like, how am I going to give back? I'm bootstrapping this business. I'm literally pouring every dime I've got back into the business. And I sat back and I thought, what are my assets? My assets were not my bank account. My assets were the friends that I had built over decades. And so I asked 52 of my friends if they would write chapters of gratitude for a life lesson learned, and then I'd put them in a book and I'd give 100% of the proceeds to charity. So Dick Vermeil, who's a Hall of Fame football coach, coached the Rams to a Super Bowl, and Tiki Barber, one of the all-time greats for the New York Giants, wrote the cover quote. Coach Vermeil wrote the foreword. And then 52 of my friends who have done incredible things wrote chapters of gratitude. And then I followed that up with another book because I figured, well, I've got another 52 friends that are very interesting that would want to do this. And then I did it again with a military book called Standing O Salute, and then did it again with the book that Coach picked up called Standing O Tribute. Randy Chastain wrote the cover quote for that one. And it's just been a fun way to give back. But the books have been fun. I hesitate to call myself an author. They're really anthologies. So I really get other very cool, interesting people to write chapters of gratitude for life lessons that they've learned. easiest way to get a hold of me, LinkedIn is my platform of choice. So if people send me a message, I get a lot of connection requests, but with nothing attached. And I'm at the maximum of what I can have for connections. So people, I think, can still follow me, but in order to be connected, first degree connections, that means I have to get rid of somebody else. So if people write me a little note, that's the best way to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Scott MacGregor on LinkedIn, comments down in or link down in the show notes. So go check that out and make sure to write Scott a message too. Tell Scott what you learned from him today on the Limitless Leadership Lounge. Also, Standing O, all those books available. He's got 4 of them right behind your head there, Scott. If you're watching on YouTube, all those available up on Amazon or wherever you get your books. So you can go find those and purchase those there. And all of those proceeds go to charity. So that's really amazing, Scott. It's really great work that you're doing. Thank you so much for your time today, Scott, and we appreciate all of your insights on the Limitless Leadership Lounge.
Thank you, guys. This was an absolutely phenomenal way to start my day, and an absolute honor to be with you guys. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. I really, really appreciate it.
Very
Thank you so
grateful for you,
much, Scott.
Scott. Thank you.